You're listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
Good. Hey, I just got back from the dentist. Got a clean bill of health, no cavities, and I got my goodie bag. It's kind of customary in the United States that the dentist gives a goodie bag, which would have like a sample size toothpaste, a toothbrush, sample size floss. And my question for you, Jeff, is when you get those, what do you do with them?
So here's my pro tip for all the consultants who are traveling all over the world. I always ask to switch out anything that I can't use for travel. So I always try to double up on like travel size, toothpaste, flossing things like that are easy to travel. I don't need the travel toothbrush or the toothbrush, the full size, whatever. So that's my pro tip out there.
And they do that for you.
Oh yeah, they're happy to. I mean, I think nobody normally probably asks them or cares. So if you just say, "Hey, can I get an extra toothpaste instead of the toothbrush?" They're usually like, "Yeah, no problem." And they usually dump a few in there.
See, this is why people listen to the Identity at the Center podcast. It's not for the information about identity and access management. It's all the life hacks you can get.
Yeah, exactly. This is how we bring value to the people for sure.
Well, I'll be interested to see our guest today, without kind of revealing who he is from Germany, lives in Germany, and I'll be interested to see if these goodie packages are something that are customary in the German dental offices.
It could also be a commentary on the health discrepancies or disparities between regions, right? I think it's like, the dentist gives you, at least in the US, right? Here's a bunch of stuff to take care of your teeth because they know you're going to eat like crap. And I don't know if that's the same around the world or not.
But it's also, you can get a toothbrush at the grocery store for 99 cents. You can get toothpaste. I think it's an indication. Some people might look at it as an indication of kind of wastefulness, right? Because usually I get these goodie packages, I stick them in the drawer. I probably have 20 of them in my bathroom. I'm not sure how many I have.
Yeah, all that plastic and stuff like that. Definitely not good for the environment, but yeah, I don't know if we can solve plastic and environmental concerns on this show. And you mentioned our guests. So before we get to that, maybe we could talk about the European Identity and Cloud Conference coming up. Jim, you want to talk about that?
Well, I think there's no better person to talk about that than our guest. So why don't we just go right to him and have him tell us all about it?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, so we're going to talk today about some of the things that you might want to consider when it comes to making your IAM project a success. And we're very pleased and excited to have Martin Kuppinger, founder and principal analyst at KuppingerCole. Welcome to the show, Martin.
Welcome, Jim and Jeff. A pleasure to be here.
Hopefully I pronounced that right. I know that I've heard various pronunciations of your last name for decades, I think, at this point. So hopefully I did it justice.
Yeah, you made it into the top 10 of the normal German speakers.
All right, well, that's good. So, obviously you've been in the IAM space for a very long time. And what I'm always curious is when we have someone on the show for the first time is really kind of understanding their origin story when it comes to getting into the identity space, because not everyone picked identity. Sometimes it picked them. And I'm curious, maybe you can just kind of briefly take us through kind of your background and how did you end up in the identity space?
I think I ended up there like probably many people ended up in the identity space in some way by accident. So it just happened. In fact, in the late 80s, I started, during my second study, I started giving computer classes, things like DBase first, or programming logic for COBOL programmers and stuff like that. And I also always looked at operating systems, and then I ended up writing my first articles and writing my first book. And that first book was about OS2. And then I also worked a little as a freelancer for Microsoft at the CeBIT fair. And the first year I've been at the OS2 booth. Microsoft really had an OS2 booth back then. And in the second year, being one of the few who had at least some idea of things like that, I ended up at a LAN manager booth. And so I started in the late 80s with early LAN manager versions, with early network versions. I even have been been looking at and working with Banyan Vines back in the day. Some still might remember that. And so that was, I would say, the early identity days. And from there, things evolved, and I never really left that space. I added a lot of things, like more around cybersecurity. I'm doing more in the data space these days again, for instance. So it's not back to the DBase roots, but really the modern stuff here. Yeah, so that's how it happened.
So I have to, I mean, you've written so many different books, something like 50 plus, and I just think about like, what is that? And that's a mind-boggling number to me, because that means you're averaging basically a couple of books a year over the last 25, plus years, however long it's been. How do you find time to do that and, be in the identity space and being such a well-known, organization and team there, where you're putting out constantly analyst reports and things like that? I guess, where do you find the time to do that?
Yeah, honestly, I don't find the time anymore. So I think my last book dates back more than 10 years. And I wrote most of the books when I was primarily working as a freelance journalist, as a book author. And that was the time where I really wrote a lot of books. And I'm a very fast writer. So I think my record for writing a book, it wasn't a big one. It was a relatively thin one. I think the record was 3 days for a book. For others, it took way longer. But anyway, I was a relatively fast writer since school, honestly, and that really helps in writing a lot of books and other stuff. I think it also helps in being an analyst, because you have to write a lot of stuff. And if you have always this blank sheet syndrome, then it's really hard to do that job. It's easier when you are very fast and efficient in writing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And now you're with KuppingerCole, and obviously putting on different conferences. And we kind of talked briefly about the European Identity and Cloud Conference coming up. I've never been to one, and I know that there's one coming up in September in Munich, and I think it's also going to be online. For someone like me who's never been to an EIC, what can you tell me about it?
Yeah, let's start, I think, with the main reason the Americans come over for the EIC. That is beer. It's in Munich. It is in normal years close to the Oktoberfest. And so that, I think, is one of the main reasons. Aside of the beer factor, we have a very large, specifically for European size of events, we have a very large gathering of identity professionals from all over the world. So from the US and Canada to New Zealand and Japan and everything, so to speak, in between. And it is also a conference where we have successfully managed to bring together the industry experts, the practitioners from enterprises of various types, from various industries, and the analysts. So it is really a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion, a lot of communication in these events. And we are always trying to pick the most relevant themes and balance also between information for sort of more the established parts. So how do you do things right from practice, and the future trends? Where's all this heading?
Yeah, Martin, I think that going to Munich and being there for the food and the beer would be fantastic. I think the online version, though, is probably what's attracting me this year. So maybe you can talk about the online experience that you're going to be offering.
And what we are doing this year is we do a fully hybrid event. So everything is available both on site and via the web. And so the online experience will be as similar as it can be to the sort of on-site experience. We try to be as interactive as we can. We will have streaming of everything, so to speak, so that we really can sort of address this challenge of many people not being allowed or not being willing to travel in these days, the restrictions we have, with the gathering of professionals from all over the world. And so we put a lot of effort into making it a really, really strong hybrid experience. And even while I'd love to have as many people on site as we can, and we do it as safe and secure with a certified approach, everything for the on-site event. Clearly, not everyone will be able to do that. And so I think the hybrid part will be a really a good option if you can't make it to Munich.
So, Martin, one of the things I just love about the offering that you guys make is there's so many webinars that you offer, and I like the fact that when you're talking about IAM programs, a lot of times you're putting that positive view, not just what is the best, not as what is the worst way to do an IAM project, or why are the reasons that IAM projects fail. You're talking about what is the best way to get your IAM project, your IAM program going. So my question to you to kind of help educate our audience is, what is the best way to start an IAM project?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like what is the best way to build a house. So you don't start with building the house. You start with thinking about how should that house look like? What do I need in that house? Which rooms do I need? It is about understanding or building a construction plan, a blueprint, all that stuff. It's about planning the project. What do you first? What do you do last? Is the foundation stable enough? And all these things. And in some way, this is the same with starting an IAM project. You need to understand whom you need to be involved in that project. You need to understand what your use cases, your requirements are. You need to understand how this relates, for instance, to all the other IT you have. Like for a house, it must fit into your ground you have. It must fit to the scenery, etc. And all these things are in some way relatively equal. So I think that the best way to start is really to understand where you want to end up at the end. You need to have a picture in mind. And as everyone has a picture in mind when starting to build a house, you should have that picture in mind when starting with your IAM journey, or when you restart your IAM journey, when you take a new thing. You need to understand your vision and your use cases, requirements, and the team. And then it's way easier to succeed in that project, in that program, we probably better say, because IAM seldom is a project. It typically is a program. It's a rather long exercise.
That's the perspective we always take. We always talk about IAM as a program, and we Jeff and I talk about a plan, build, run methodology. That plan is that piece that you're talking about, but in light of the program, it's not just planning the project, but planning all of the components of running a program, like having a roadmap, making sure that you have good governance and things like that. Obviously, build is implementing your technology or making modifications to process, and run being the operations, but doing operations in the proper way so that you're putting out metrics that are meaningful and drive KPIs and things like that. I guess I'd be kind of asleep at the wheel if I didn't at least ask. So, what is the worst way to start an IAM project? Is it as simple as just not having a plan, or is there more to it?
Yeah, so I thought maybe I add something first to the best way, because what I quite frequently hear is, oh, we don't have the time to do that. We don't have the time to plan. We need to quickly get the system up and running. We need to quickly solve that. Honestly, I've never ever seen a project that was faster without proper planning than it would have been with proper planning. And that in some way leads also to the worst way, because at the end it is you don't plan properly. And I think the worst way to start an IAM project is to say, I have a problem. I think that might be the right type of tool to solve it. And then what I've seen far too frequent, then you take a couple of tools and they have little to do with each other, because these were the ones you found by searching the web. And then you pick one of these tools and you start. And a tool-driven project is very likely to fail unless you have planned properly. So the tool comes at a certain point, and you even can speed it up because you can parallelize a lot of planning. You can really try to be very quick, and it isn't that you spend 6 months or 12 months or 18 months for planning only if you do it right. You can speed up things, but don't start, and this is, I really believe, is the worst way, by saying, oh, there's a problem and this might be the solution, and I picked that tool and I think it might be the right type of tool, or someone told me it's the right type of tool, or whatever, an analyst put it to the upper right position in whichever type of rating. That also usually says, okay, these are quite good tools, but it doesn't say, is this the tool you need? Is this the tool for your problem? This is this, if you need a screwdriver and you choose a hammer, then you did something wrong. Okay, you can try to hammer the nail in with the screwdriver, but it doesn't work as good as with the hammer.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of organizations that just kind of take the analyst view, right, and say, okay, well, we're just going to look at the upper right. And then all of a sudden it becomes, when you have a hammer, everything becomes a nail, and you start to stretch, tools into areas maybe that weren't designed to do what they're trying to do, right? And then you end up in this rabbit hole of customization, or you're just unhappy with a really good product that you're trying to make do something that it's not supposed to be doing.
And there are so many ways to make this fail, at the end of the day. You pick the wrong tool, you pick the wrong implementation approach, etc. So there are really a lot of ways to make a project fail. And that is why I say you need to plan, you need to understand what you need to think about your target operating model, your deployment model. You need to pick the right integrator, which fits to you and the tool, where you also have, and your team think, okay, I can really work well with these guys or girls. This is what you need to do. There are a lot of factors, and failure in one of these areas of thinking ahead of planning really increases the risk of greatly failing in the project.
I think the other thing that makes it challenging too is that, we're in this kind of age of IGA tooling specifically also, where a lot of the choices out there are actually quite good. This is not the IGA of 15 or 20 years ago where there was only one or two choices and this is just how you had to do it. Now you've got vendors like SailPoint, Savient, Omada, Clear Sky, One Identity, etc. And ultimately they're all pretty good. And what I find it comes down to is the details. How is something done? Does it match up with the way you want it to get done, etc.?
And I think that's interesting, because if you take these 4 vendors you've just mentioned, and all of them have, and for instance, our leadership compass, depending on the leadership compass we take, a quite good position. But they are really 4 very different types of vendors. And with SailPoint, in fact, you even have 2 different types of offerings, more or less, with the traditional and the SaaS-based one. That means the question is, which of these solutions or the others in the market, so I think we won't go through the entire list of 30, 40, 50 vendors in that space, and maybe another 70 for access management. So the point is, who really fits to your requirements, and which type of solution do you need? And that is not that the one tool is always the best and the others isn't. It is really what fits, what meets your requirements. And I think this is also, we are analysts, we are publishing our leadership compass, but I still always can just raise the alarm: don't blindly trust the analysts. So the tool in the upper right edge, or wherever it is in whichever type of graphic the analysts create, is overall a very good tool. But it may not be the right one for you. It might be even that a tool which is very low down is the best solution for what you need. And that is what you need to understand. And so what we can give as analysts is give you a guidance and advice on where to start, at whom to look. But, take our leadership compass. This is then usually a 50, 60, 70 page document. So don't stop with the first graphic. Go through the document, read the details, because you will spend, take an IGA project, that usually means you spend hundreds, thousands, millions, maybe even tens of millions if you're a really large organization for the project overall, from licensing to deployment to customization, operations, etc. And then it's very worth to spend some time and a little money on reducing, mitigating the risk in choosing the right tool.
Yeah, in my mind, it's not, is there a tool that can do it? What's the right tool? Because that best fit is always something that you're looking for, and not to belittle the research of the analyst, because it certainly is a valuable part of the equation. But I think that's the part that people miss, is it's part of the equation. It shouldn't be the only part of the decision making process. And I do see that time to time is, we'll go into an organization sometimes, we're talking to them, it's like, oh, we only look at the upper right for Gartner, or we only look at the leadership compass or the Forrester Wave, whatever it may be. And they eliminate products that might be a better fit for them. They might be cheaper, right? And because they're so blinded by that star of, hey, we're upper right, whatever that means, right? And they want the best, and they tend to kind of only focus on that. So I think it's really important for folks who are listening is, yes, it's very good data and there's very good reports being done on this, but please, consider that it shouldn't be the only point of your decision-making process, because you're probably ruling out a lot of stuff that might be a better fit. And I think this is where program management itself plays a big role when it comes to an IAM program. Is having a strong IAM program manager, for example, is something that I firmly believe in, to be able to drive an organization forward from an identity perspective. And I don't feel like they need to be the most technical person in the room, but they do need to have a solid understanding of identity, how the vision is for it to work within an organization, and how to basically enable that vision. And I'm curious, from your perspective, Martin, what, from an IAM program manager as a role within an IAM program itself, what makes a good IAM program manager in your view?
Yeah, so I think you already raised some of the aspects. There's a need for a certain level of understanding of the space, not being the super expert necessarily, but I think we are talking about programs with projects, long running, costly, challenging, involving a lot of stakeholders, and being about connecting to many systems, so even more system owners. So the ability to communicate, to promote, to sell is very important, but also to coordinate all the efforts. So in Germany we have ein Sack voll Flöhe hüten, so keeping an eye on a sack of fleas. So how do you really manage that? So everyone is trying to do something different, and you have always different parties. So the vendor, your own teams, the system integrators, etc. And this is really, I think, the main task for a program manager, to ensure that everyone is at the end pulling the rope in the same direction.
I feel like there's another component too that always gets, not always, but it's politics too, right? Navigating the internal politics. And I feel like a good program manager is a good politician or an ambassador for the program. They're out there shaking hands, making relationships, shaking hands, kissing babies, all the stuff that you typically would see, right, to gain support. Is that something that you have as part of your view as well?
Yeah, I think it exactly is that, and I think it also that goes directly to what is a bad program manager. I think the worst thing a program manager can do is doing too much of politics. So the job is reducing the level of politics, not increasing it. I think that really the worst thing at the end of the day is playing too much politics. So instead of calming things down, doing quite the opposite.
I think that's really insightful. I think that hopefully people heard that one. Went back and I was thinking about some of my career history, and I remember working for an executive who said, don't put politics in a slide, right? Nobody wants to hear that we're dealing with politics, even though it's true. But then I also thought of a situation I dealt with where I had a manager, we were talking about, the IAM system's going to do this and going to do that. And his question to me was, well, what do I get for it? And if it didn't have like some kind of like fancy looking website or some new application functionality, I wasn't getting anything. Security wasn't anything. And, being able to manage users in a more efficient and secure way wasn't like a feature. Now, obviously, that was a long time ago, and hopefully people's thinking has evolved. But I think that was very much political, like, hey, we're going to spend this cash. We need to have some fancy new gadget that everybody sees.
Yeah, but I think that is still the case in some way. So I always say what you need are defined quick wins. So you need to plan for quick wins. But what is frequently underestimated is you also need from the very beginning to plan for the big wins. You need to say, okay, there are two levels. The one is what can we achieve quickly, which helps us in having the visibility that we are making progress. And what are the longer term targets, having the vision, the planning in mind, where we really make a bigger progress. And I still believe that it's important to understand identity management. I think it's maybe even easier. So when I started identity management, it was at the beginning, it was about optimizing IT administration. So it was a very administrative thing. Then Sarbanes-Oxley Act came into play, and we talked about governance as an impact. And we also very early had the user friendliness, mainly via single sign-on. And so right now, I think identity management is way more about us, and not only something which helps to do things we need to do, but to enable business. And I think this is the one thing also needs to be in the mind of the program manager, of the project people at any time. How can you really deliver to the business value? And one of the things to bring up here is the time of value for digital service. If you have a strong identity management foundation, specifically around partners, things, customers or consumers or citizens, then and you can build your digital service against the existing defined well-working infrastructure, then the time for building new digital services goes down. You increase the time to value. Then we're talking about positive things. And the other thing is clearly identity management contributes to cybersecurity. And in today's digital business, failing in cybersecurity can, in worst case, mean that you're failing as a business. So, but it's again a little bit more on the negative side. The positive thing is we really enable digital business by doing our identity management exercises beyond the workforce, but not forgetting the workforce well.
So, Martin, I'd like to bring it back a little bit to what we originally kicked off this conversation around the best way to run an IAM project, or best way to start an IAM project or program. And you provided us with a graphic, and I'm hoping we can get a hyperlink so that we can put it in the show notes. Everybody can go out and check out this graphic. But my key takeaway from this was especially around, you have a block called successful delivery of the IAM project. And a lot of the things that are in that block are the same things that make almost any IT project successful. And so I guess my question to you is, what is it about the IAM project that would be different than making other projects successful? Maybe start by covering, what are some of those key things that make a project successful, and then what are the differences?
Yeah. So, and you're right. In some way, it's what makes complex projects successful. One thing is planning, budgeting, stakeholder management. So what we already touched, you need to have the money, you need to have the people on board, good project management, stuff like that. You need to understand your requirements, and you not only what you currently have as requirement, but you also need to understand your future trends, the regulatory requirements. You need to have people's processes, policies in place. And this is maybe where identity management projects differ a little from many other, because yes, people and organization very clear, but the process part and the policy part maybe are even more essential than, for many other projects. So you will definitely have a better running IGA project when you do the paper exercise of defining all the processes that are related to that. So not only high-level joiner, mover, lever, but there are so many more. There are different types of lever processes. There's the model management. So how do you create a role? How do you change a role? How do you do things like that? How do you onboard an application? How do you get changes about applications? If you do that exercise, then it really makes a difference. And then last but not least, there's the tools and implementation thing, which is, as I've said, so roughly thinking about what is the right tool for my requirements, stress testing this, going through a comprehensive process, but also understanding the target operating model, understanding what is the right provider and system integrator in that context of the target operating model, and having last but not least architecture implementation guidelines. So why is this maybe a little different at the end also than it is for several other projects? I think there are at least few IT projects which are that much cross system and sort of across the entire organization. So when we do identity and access management, everyone is involved, every system is involved. We have a lot of relations to other IT systems. Take the SIEM, so Security Information Event Management, take IT Service Management, and so on. So we have a really complex environment. So we don't do it in a restricted area, but it impacts everyone and every system in the organization. And that makes it more complex, and that's also the reason why I believe that good planning and good program management and also good project management and execution is so essential for identity and access management.
Yeah, and I think the program manager is ideally somebody who can be the thought leader. I think if they're not the thought leader, they need to be able to figure out how they get that thought leadership. Because I think what you're talking about there is, understanding a lot of what's going on in the space and how it may affect you. And when I say in the space, I'm talking about in the cybersecurity space, but also in the industry that you happen to be working in. What are those trends? How is the technology environment kind of maturing to meet those trends? And if you're not that thought leader, it doesn't mean you won't be a good program manager, but you do need to have somebody along for the ride who can help you out in that way.
And I think exactly that's the point. I think the expectation that every program manager is the thought leader is unrealistic. I think it's about knowing with whom to talk, having people you listen to, you ask the questions for. And again, I think this is something where also analysts play their role. So what we, for instance, see is that we are more and more asked to form sort of a sounding board for the program managers, where we meet with them, whatever, fortnightly or so, for a short time, 60 minutes, maybe 90 minutes, get an update, provide our feedback back. And so really this back and forth thing. These are ways, I think, where you can, in various forms and various types of experts, really form your team or so, which helps you to, as I've said, in some way, form of a sounding board to ensure that you're on the right track, that you have the insights, that you get the learnings you need.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think what I see is that I'm a full-time IAM strategy consultant, right? That's what I do for a living. I struggle to keep up with all the new products. So a CIEM is a new space, right? So you have to go out and research it. And then ultimately you have to kind of decide, is this even important? Do I need this? Well,
No.
But so that's where you need to be able to tap that thought leadership. But what I'm saying is, if you're spending 75% of your week running a program, that means you have less time to actually do the kind of research.
Yeah, and I think maybe I was a little bit too direct on CIEM. I think the point is where I really struggle with. I think that the technology behind the ability to manage entitlements across hybrid cloud or multi-cloud, multi-hybrid environments is really essential. The only thing I would put in, I would question is, do we need yet another category of tools, or is this something which should be part of a bigger picture, which should be part of a more holistic perspective? And I'm always reluctant when there's yet another tool category, because this is just a part of what your IAM should deliver. And we created this picture of the identity fabric, the paradigm, where we say, start with a holistic perspective on what you want to do. And the main question of identity and access management at the end is relatively simple, or the main job. It's provide seamless yet secure and controlled access for everything and everyone to every service, regardless of where it runs. That includes CIEM. That includes way more. That includes the identity of things, that includes consumer identity and other things, and that includes all the abilities within that. And then you need to think about what of that, when you really start this high level, what of these capabilities do you need? Which of them do you already have at a certain level? Where to start? Where to focus on? How to prioritize? Because if you have an IAM program and you try to do everything, you will also fail. Many of these projects you have done, IGA versus access management versus PAM, all of them are three big things to do. So don't try to run them fully in parallel, but try to understand where's your biggest need to start. And I think this is really what is then super important for a successful project and program.
One thing, while we have you here, I want to pick your brain on something, which is a lot of organizations I've worked with, not just recently, but always, is they have varying levels of capabilities for, I'd say COE type services like a PMO or requirements center of excellence or testing center of excellence, even something as simple as having an inventory of what are the IT assets in the organization, a CMDB. You might walk into somewhere that they have that very mature, and that's great, and that will help fuel the IAM program so that you can implement your project and not have to come up with an inventory or not have to, figure out everything on how you're going to test it, because you have people who specialize in QA and they can bring that to the table. My question for you is, for the organizations that don't have that, you step into an organization, they don't even have a CMDB. Should the IAM program even take that on? Or should the pressure be put back upstream? Hey, we need this, and IT needs to deliver, another part of IT needs to deliver that to the IAM program.
Yeah. So that situation where someone says, oh, we have ServiceNow, and then you say, oh, great, and you have a CMDB, and they say, oh, we have ServiceNow, but we don't have a CMDB. Just recently happened to me, where you can say, okay, then I can't build on that. So I think that brings us to one of these really common discussions and challenges you have in various flavors in these IAM programs, which is, it would be great to have something in place, and it isn't in place. I think another example you have seen probably hundreds of times in your life, in your professional career, is HR. So I have been in involved in so many projects where they said, oh, we are currently in the consolidation of our HR. And then 3 years later, they were still consolidating the HR, so you can't build on that. And I think the art here is to understand what are things that are easy to solve and what are realities you just need to accept, and then to move forward. And so in the case of HR, it means if there's not the one HR, then you need to find a way to deal with that, which means you need to consolidate inputs from many HRs. It might be that you even put a master data management tool, an ETL tool, in front of your IGA solution in that case. But then it is about, I think two things here are important. What is your quick fix? So an ETL tool is not really a lean fix, but at least it is something which helps you making your part work without waiting for years and without delaying everything. It's probably one of the leaner and smarter solutions, more pragmatic solutions you can take. And you also need to think about from the very beginning, what does it mean once that whatever global HR is in place? So how do you then make your shift. And the same, I think, is true for CMDB or an IT asset management. Yes, it would be perfect to have this in place and to consume that information and utilize it for an automated application onboarding and for automated changes. If you don't have it, you need to understand what are the processes, how do they look like without, and how will they look like with that solution. And if you do that, then you can decide on what is my pragmatic approach, how do I make it work without over-investing now, when I know that there will be something in place maybe in 2 or 3 years, and even if it's then 4 years, and then you know how to also switch to a better solution. So I think this is the way to address these challenges. And we have to accept the realities in organizations. Clearly, one part of the guidance then is also how must you change your organization? What are maybe other projects you need to prioritize? But no organization can do everything at the same point, and we must avoid that we end up in a scenario where we totally delay the identity management project, which is also essential, because we wait for all the others to succeed.
I think another area that I see constantly people struggle with is around Active Directory. And, we have, 38 different domains and we're in the process of consolidating down to 1 or 5 or whatever it may be. And it becomes a situation of, okay, what domains are we connecting to? Which ones are we going to manage? And what's the migration path around there? And I feel like this is another area too, where, a good IAM program and good program leadership will help identify what are the battles that are worth fighting and what are the ones that are not worth fighting right now. Any thoughts on that?
I think for AD it's even more interesting because we have the on-premises Active Directory, we have the Azure Active Directory, and factually I think we are in a situation now that the on-premise Active Directory is shifting into legacy state. So the first question to ask yourself and the related and involved parties is how much effort to spend for something that is on the legacy side of things. Yes, and there are scenarios you will need an on-prem AD. Maybe if you are a manufacturing organization for the shop floor, for the systems there, you will need it probably for years. But how must this look like? And is it something where you should really spend immense amounts of money in a Active Directory consolidation, a domain consolidation, consolidating forests, or is it something where you say, okay, let's keep it then for the future as simple as we can and focus on the future? So, yeah. And sometimes you then say also, there are fights you will not win. So focus on the ones you can win. So I'm not a big believer in the Don Quixote approach, fighting the windmills.
I like that analogy. There was one thing that you mentioned earlier around product selection that I want to get into just kind of briefly. And I think this is an area that a lot of organizations, frankly, overcomplicate things. And that's around POCs or proof of concepts. And when they try to pull in, okay, so they're trying to decide on a technology, and they've got a short list, however they've come up with it, 3, 4, 5 vendors, whatever it looks like. And then they go through 3 months, 6 months of, testing out products and having the vendor come in and things like that. And I feel like there's got to be a lot more efficient way to do that. Either taking the approach of, okay, we think we know what we want to go with. Do we go with the mindset of why not this specific application or vendor, right? You don't tell the vendor that because you want to keep your negotiating, power, stuff, things like that. But what are some of the things that in your mind makes for a good POC process versus things that you think really don't add value to a POC process?
Yeah, I think the first thing is the stage before the POC process. So you should, from your shortlist, via really a comprehensive RFI and RFP, nail down the list to usually 2 vendors. You also will have these vendor presentations. I tend to call them beauty contests. You learn a lot about the vendors there, and then you have the 2, and ideally you had 1 or 2, I would say, a little different vendors also in the list of 5, to understand what does it mean, and to learn what does it mean if a vendor does tackles a problem, a certain problem somewhat differently. When you're done down to the 2, then a POC builds on defined POC use cases. So there should be a clear definition of what you want to test. It's a proof of concept. It's not a pilot. It's not an implementation. It's not an MVP. It is a proof of concept. And that proof should look at the end of the day, what you need to learn is how does the vendor and the integrator deal with challenges? Are they able to solve some of the difficult challenges? So the list of use cases must not be too long. It depends on how big you define the use cases. So when we come up with such lists, we usually are in a space around whatever 30 use cases or so. There are very simple ones like for IGA, build a connection to an Active Directory or an Azure Active Directory. Do a standard access request, access approval thing. It will not take long for the vendor. And then you need to look at the things where you feel from experience, either you had in your own organization or experience your partners bring in, what are the things that commonly lead to challenges. So if a vendor can connect to a mainframe, that vendor probably can connect to every system, more or less. But don't go into every complex system. So don't make it too complex. If the vendor can prove that he can deal with a complex scenario here with something relatively complex there, so pick some of these things and test it. And then a proof of concept, in most cases, we see it runs 2 weeks, which is, I think, a reasonable time. And you might then have the environment up and running for a few more days. I'm, by the way, I'm a big believer in if you have two vendors to run the POCs in parallel, easy to do, technically seen with the virtualization, brings in a very interesting competitive edge on this. But I know that vendors are not that lucky with this approach because it really is a lot about competition. But for the customers, which did that, they usually were, they said they learned a lot about it because, you see it on the same time. You can compare it very well.
I can imagine that's going to be adding a lot of angst to the vendors, which probably not a bad thing if you're the customer, right? This vendor battle royale where, you've got one room where you've got one vendor and another room with another vendor. And these rooms are probably virtual, right, at this point. But, I can imagine, SailPoint and Savient, 2 different rooms, duking it out, right? Or CyberArk and Thycotic or Beyond Trust. I think that would actually make for a relatively interesting reality TV series, something like the Great Bake Off, or what's the American equivalent, like American Idol, but focused on technology.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we've covered a lot of ground here, and I know that we want to be respectful of your time. So maybe we've got we could certainly talk for hours, but what I'm thinking is maybe that we do kind of like a rapid fire session here, where I'm just going to rattle off a bunch of questions, and we'll ask you for your opinion in a brief format, and we'll just kind of go from there. And the first one I have is another one that I like to kind of coin as one of the holy wars that takes place in an IAM program in an organization. That's around non-employees in enterprise IAM specifically, and who should own them. Is this something that HR takes on? Is it something that finance takes on? Does it matter as long as someone is owning this population? Because the alternative that we typically see is IT owns it, or the IAM program has to own it because no one else is doing it. So, Martin, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think that for every group of non-employees, and it's not the non-employee, there are different types of non-employees. There are contractors. There are people on the physical security of a factory. There are really very many different types of non-employees. There are people coming in during the summer break into onto the shop floor, working on the machinery there. And for every group of non-employees, there is a logical owner in the organization. And that is what your processes should support. So not saying it's the non-employee, but understanding which types of non-employees have which ownerships and how they are managed, because also the management is very different. There's ones that are very close to an employee. Take contractors. Processes are relatively close to the employee. If you take others, that process might be way closer to a customer you have. There are some which are managed by your partner organizations, there are others which are partnered by your team. So understand it, deconstruct it. It's one of the most complex areas because it has a lot of varieties. And so there's not, this is the right place to do it. It's about understanding who should do what here.
Jim, what about yourself?
Well, I think HR should this own the non-employee population. I mean, they are workers, part of the workforce. If all we had to do was manage who has access to IT systems, I could see it being somebody other than HR. But the fact that they get paid on payroll versus paid as contractors, there's still people in the organization who can break policies and do all the things that HR does beyond just paying people. So to me, it's an artificial limit on who HR is responsible for. They're called human resources. They should manage those human resources. They're not called employee resources and not contractor resources, right? So that's my 2 cents.
What do we do with the software robots then? Another group of identities, not even human, but somewhere in between, probably closer to many partners or workforces. Not really an HR thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean it's I think if other policies need to apply to them that are policies that would apply to employees in terms of like harassment policies and things like that, if a non-employee sexually harasses another non-employee or an employee or vice versa, is the company any less liable for that situation? It has nothing to do with cyber access. So I get the point that you're talking about, which is like, well, where do you draw the line? I guess what I'm saying is that at least from a contractor perspective or people who are within the walls of the company working as, hey, if they completely outsource it to somebody else, does it apply? Yeah, it does get cloudy there.
I think the key that differentiator there is human, right? We're talking about humans and non-humans, and what happens when AI starts to proliferate through an organization. Who's going to be responsible for that? Can you have an AI bot sexually harass another AI bot? Right. I mean, these are things maybe.
Well, we have to have Elon Tesla on the show to let us know about that.
Right. All right. Let's move on. So another hot button topic that typically comes up is what should be the front door for access requests. There's a school of thought that it should be part of the ITSM or IT service management system, the ticketing system, something like a ServiceNow, for example, or it could be the identity governance platform itself, which typically has some sort of workflow that's specific to access request, or maybe it's something else. What are your thoughts, Martin?
Yeah, I think first there's a need for ITSM to IGA integration in 2 areas. One is for the request side, and I think it makes a lot of sense to have a unified place or one place where you can start your requests. The interesting point is what are the limitations here? And I'll touch this in a second. The other side is if you look at IGA, then you rarely will have all your systems connected for automated provisioning. So you have a lot of manual fulfillment that should go through the IGA system, and then ITSM and ticketing should be the area where manual fulfillment then is executed. But back to the other side for the service requests, I think having the one portal where people know if I need something from IT, I request it here. That is basically a very good idea. That doesn't mean that you build your IGA on top of an ITSM platform. There are different approaches to do that. That would be a very long discussion, nothing for a rapid fire question. The thing where you need to be careful is, for instance, when it comes to SOD checks or so, then you're starting to look at a lot of back and forth between the IGA system and the SOD controls and the ITSM system. So it needs to be carefully evaluated. But having the option to start at a place everyone knows is definitely a good idea.
Jim, how about yourself?
I think philosophically it makes a lot of sense to front end that access request process. I think tactically speaking, you wind up tying your destiny of your IGA system to ITSM. So for example, if ServiceNow is being managed by another group, you're kind of beholden to that group to making changes. Change control, I think, could be an issue. So philosophically, I agree with it. I just need to see it working, really smoothly. And I also think that there's kind of a limitation. I think ServiceNow is kind of the industry favorite. So if you're on ServiceNow, it might work. I think if you're on another platform and you have to wire together APIs and things like that, uh, I'd beware. I'd say, if I were in the program manager position, I'd favor, having people route to the IGA system for now until it's kind of more of a mature thing.
The good thing is processes won't change. At the end, it's still the same process, and you're just changing interfaces, and so you can start on the one side and then add that connectivity also at a later point, or depending on where your pressure comes from.
I think it boils down to strategy, right? If you're not sure what your ITSM is going to be in 1 year or 2 years, then maybe it's not the right sand to build your foundation on, right? Wait until it's a little more concrete. All right, let's move on to the next one. I think this is one that has been popular, at least in the industry, and that's passwordless. And I'm curious, Martin, from your perspective, why hasn't passwordless become more mainstream in enterprise environments?
I think it's becoming more mainstream. I think that's the positive side. So when you look at things like Windows Hello for Business, for instance, then there's a tendency to go to move more passwordless. I think there's a lot of history in that. So on one hand, a lot of people, less on the identity space, but in many other areas, are still very used to its username password. So when I'm surfing the web and I go to a website and I want to purchase something, then it's always or mostly it is register yourself, pick a username, pick a password. So there's frequently not even an option to do it differently. So I think one of the problems is changing the mindset of the people who are developing that, because we have the technology, we have things like decentralized identity, we have a ton of options to do passwordless authentication. Good, and the cool thing, and I think you're right, we should be way further with that, because passwordless authentication in the way we can do it today is something where we increase security and we increase convenience in parallel. So we have a win-win here. I think it's still, we are somewhere in the learning curve. That's the only reason, but I'm very hopeful and positive on that.
Jim?
I think I agree with everything Martin said. The only thing I would kind of add to the conversation, I think, is that a lot of organizations are laggards in IAM, right? And they're having to catch up in so many other areas, and they're looking at passwordless as icing on the cake. I don't think it's icing on the cake, but I think that's the view that it is being taken as, hey, we need to get our IGA capability, we need to get our PAM capability, we need to get our single sign-on MFA stood up, and passwordless would be nice to add on to that. I think also people are just kind of becoming awake or aware of passwordless as a capability. So I think those are kind of the stumbling blocks and why it's not, to kind of go back to how you asked the question. That's why it hasn't become more mainstream.
To put it clear, if you don't have MFA in place now, then do it. That is your number one priority in identity management. And if you do MFA, then think about passwordless as at least one of the ways to implement MFA. Otherwise, you do it wrong. It's so simple.
MFA, all the things as much as you can. Passwords are not good enough anymore. I think we all know that. And I think one thing to consider too is once you have your MFA in place is to think about factor sequencing. Moving MFA to the front and then doing a password after that can also make things a lot easier for people. Martin, you mentioned decentralized identity, and that's something that comes up from time to time on our show. What are your thoughts on decentralized identity? Is there a place for this? Is this still 3 to 5 years out or longer, or do you think it's something that's going to happen sooner?
I think it's closer than many think, because we see a lot of investments, we see a lot of innovation in that space. We see a lot of large vendors entering that space and pushing these technologies. I think that the biggest hurdle maybe for decentralized identity is, aside of some gaps in the standards and the usual stuff, I think one of the biggest gaps is probably the understand or the lack of understanding of how all these things play together. So how does decentralized identity and authenticators and IDPs and customer records and our system of records and all these different things how are they related? And I think a good exercise can be really to deconstruct this. I can use the same authenticator like the fingerprint on my iPhone for a variety of things. It's not always the same what happens here. I can use different identity providers to the same company or the same identity provider for different targets. And so we need to deconstruct this to understand what happens where and where do we have which level of flexibility. And then decentralized identity is a great means for simplifying user onboarding, identity vetting, all these processes to make it way more efficient than it is, not only for customers and consumers, but at least also for instance, business partners. If they bring in their verified identity, then you can save money because you can simplify business processes.
Jim, your thoughts on decentralized identity?
Well, I think it could be a complete game changer. I love the technology. I think what needs to happen is that it needs to hit some kind of breaking point or tipping point where it's like electronic passports or electronic driver's licenses start and universities adopt it to say, all right, we can add a university credential onto an identity. And it's like once it hits that certain tipping point, I think it could completely take over how identification is done on the internet.
Yeah, I feel like if this technology had been more prevalent maybe 2 years ago, we might have seen a better approach to vaccine status, for example, right? Having a way to be able to validate some sort of credential or thing that took place in a more consistent manner. Because I'm thinking about how that works. So I live in the Chicago area, and we just had Lollapalooza over the weekend, which is a huge, music concert in the U.S. And one of the things that they stipulated was if you're coming to the show, meaning you're going to be, here with thousands of other people, is you need to have a current, you must be updated on your vaccine status, meaning you've had it, or you need to have had a negative COVID test within the last 2 or 3 days. I don't remember the exact time frame. How do you prove that? I think has been a challenge for a lot of organizations to say, okay, well, do we have, a fake card? Is the card not filled out correctly? There's a variety of different tests you could take, which are good, which are bad, right? Things like that. And I feel like that's a prime area where you've got these approaches where, citizen type things, education type things, even medical record type things. I think there's a large component there that could play with it. Martin, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it goes well beyond, for instance, the KYC, the know your customer process and the regulated finance industry. And so there are really a lot of opportunities. And, I think there's so much benefit for many areas where you need a vetted identity. And I think also for globalization, it is super important because it's really about going away from national schemes to schemes that can be globally used. So I hope that we see a lot more adoption and progress in this space.
I just thought of this one follow-up question, if I can, on this topic, because I wonder if there is a global standard when it comes to identity, and I think maybe decentralized identity might fit this at some point. Would that help with regulations and all the different types that we have all around the world, where we've got things like GDPR and SOX and HIPAA and New York DFS, right? I'm sure, and there's tons of others out there where at the end of the day, they're all relatively similar from an identity perspective. It's, do the right people have the right access, and was that approved by the right person, and can you prove it?
Yeah, I think there are two elements in that which might be very helpful. Two elements within decentralized identity. The one is that you have the verified credentials or verifiable credentials with certain levels of assurance. So if you agree on the levels of assurance at a standard level, then every sort of receiving party can decide on, is this good enough for me? Which do I need? What is what I accept? And maybe also what do I don't count as a LOA for or so. The other part is which was more in this self-sovereign identity term, which also is used for decentralized identities, which is about giving control back to the user. So, and that is what helps us in onboarding. I can control which data I give away. And having this ability also, I think, helps with many of the regulations, specifically when it comes to privacy laws, where having the control at the side of the user and some sort of electronic contracts, which are at least implicitly in place about how this data can be used, is a super interesting thing. And I think it is also will allow to create fundamentally new business models behind that, because you can do a lot of very interesting things. So imagine that I can share maybe at a certain point my salary statements for a defined period with a bank where I'm asking for a loan. What that would mean in process cost savings is tremendous. And so we wrote about this some 10 years ago or so under the title of Life Management Platforms already. And I think there are a lot of great ideas from the time which might right now become reality. And so I believe that if we really build on the potential of decentralized identity, there's a huge potential where identity management really leverages and enables, changes the way we do digital business.
What's your favorite thing about being in the identity space?
A lot of smart people, and it never gets boring. You always think, oh, we've got a certain level of maturity here, and then something fundamentally new pops up and changes everything again. And for me as an analyst, that makes it super interesting.
Jim, what's your favorite thing?
When I got into IT, it was like I would learn a term like TCP/IP, and then I'd have to figure out what is this TCP/IP thing and how does it work, and then you find out it's binary numbers and how do those work. And there's a lot of things in the identity space that are the same way, like OAuth 2. Like, I have to know how that works. What's this token exchange that's taking place? So to me, it kind of satisfies my need to figure things out and nerd out, and so that's one of the things I love the most. What about you, Jeff?
I like the people for sure. I think it's a very welcoming community, regardless of your experience level. I mean, we're talking with, one of the titans in the industry right now, Martin, who's been around for a long time, 30 plus years, I imagine. I've been in the space for 17 or so, and Jim, the same. And even people who've only been in it for 1 or 2 years. I think there's a broad swath of people who are very intelligent. They have good intentions, and I think this also part of it is, I think it's a great intersection of business process, technology, and experience, meaning the user experience, right? How do you blend all three to come up with this thing that makes sense? It works, it meets the needs of the business or regulation or whatever it is you're trying to do. So I kind of see it as kind of like that holy trinity, at least from my perspective. So yeah. All right. I know we've been running a little bit long, but I do want to ask, because Martin, you're in Stuttgart, and and from the German perspective, from a food question here. So what is the best German food that people don't know about, but they should try?
Yeah, so first it's Swabian food, very clearly. So I'm Stuttgart, Swabian. There's no doubt about it. The best German food is the Swabian food. Within the Swabian food, so I like a couple of things a lot of other people don't like. For instance, sour calf liver or sour kidney. So we have a lot of dishes which have a little bit of a sour flavor therein. Not everyone likes it. So I would say for the more sort of mainstream parts, so everyone probably knows Swabian noodles, the Spätzle. Probably a few people less know about the Swabian ravioli, the Maultaschen. Also, the term in Swabian would be Herrgottsscheißele. So it means cheating God, because they have been are said to be have been created by monks during the fasting period, and they wrap the noodle duff around the beef so that God can't see it. That's where the term comes from. So that's the Herrgottsscheißele. Very tasty. I really like it. Best with a Swabian potato salad. Swabians are the only ones who can do a good potato salad, by the way. It's really high art. And last not least, to mention something more on the sweet side of things, I also can recommend, if you ever have a chance to get it, is an Ofenschlüpfer or Ofenschlüpfer, which translates into slipping out of the oven, which is, and it goes back to the days where the Swabian region was very poor, and the people really had to use what they had, and it's made of old bread and milk and apples and a few other ingredients, but nothing exclusive. And it is then made in the oven in a mix of these things and some sugar on it and some cinnamon. It really tastes great if it's done right. Unfortunately, it's mostly done by the grandmas. So only if you happen to have a Swabian grandma, you have a good chance to get it. There are enough recipes right now on the internet, so try this. But I could spend hours on that as well, probably as long as with identity management. So I make a stop here.
I feel like we've just discovered our next $1 million app is some sort of like Tinder, except for German grandmothers who know how to cook that. And you match up with somebody who knows how to do that. Jim, what's your favorite German food?
German food is awesome. And my context is in 2006, I was in Frankfurt doing business, and it was actually during the World Cup. So it was a very cool time to be there. And I got to spend some time in the German beer houses. Um, and that is such an awesome experience. And now those are getting popular in the US. But so from a food perspective, I'm going to be very simple here. It's those pretzels. They just go so good with the beer. That's my food. Pretzels.
Now, do you do the pretzel with the salt or the sesame seeds?
I Good question. I go with the salt. I
If
like
if it's with sesame,
saltiness.
then it's not a pretzel, a real one.
Okay, Martin coming
So,
out
so a
firing
real
here.
a real pretzel must have salt on it, and it must be handmade. That is what makes pretzels relatively expensive compared to other stuff, because it must be handwork. You can't automate it if you do it right.
Gotcha. I'm relatively simple. I don't know if I necessarily have as much experience with the German cuisine. Bratwurst. I think being from Chicago, that's huge, especially from a tailgating perspective and things that you can kind of throw on the grill and have any number of ways. So relatively simple, I guess. But a good bratwurst or good sausage, things like that. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I have. By the way, I have the advantage living in Stuttgart means we have a lot of good breweries, but we also have a lot of vineyards. So we have both here in Stuttgart, which also is quite good in combination with the food.
So, Martin, I had one other question. So it's kind of a carryover from the intro dialogue. The goodie bags from the dentist. I'm not sure. Do they have those in Germany? For the sake of our audience, do you get a goodie bag at the end of your dental cleaning?
No, we don't get this. I've never seen this, so it's interesting what you showed me, but you don't get it over here.
Your goodie is clean teeth.
No cavities.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, I think that's a good spot. Martin, I certainly really appreciate your time. Before we get going, are there any final thoughts around kind of this topic of identity that we started with about, how do we make a identity program or an identity project a success? Anything that we've talked about here that you'd like to kind of leave our listening audience with?
I think we really covered this in very detail. Again, it's start with a plan, know where you want to end up. Because if you have a clear picture in mind of, not only in mind, also on paper, where you want to end up with that program, then it helps you to understand how to prioritize. It also helps you to understand, okay, this is something I need to do short term to cover certain needs. It's not in scope with what I want to achieve, but I do it tactical, and you can sell it as tactical and get rid of it again. So planning at the end, having a plan, having a vision, is from my perspective the most essential thing. And a little bit of self-advertising, a great place to learn about it is our upcoming European Identity Conference.
Yeah, so that is coming up September 13th to the 16th in Munich, Germany, also online. I'll have a link in our show notes for people to be able to check that out so that they can hopefully get out there and see and hear from Martin and other luminaries in the identity space. Jim, how about yourself? Any closing thoughts for this week?
Just a big thank you to Martin. I mean, he's somebody that we've wanted to get on the show for, the 2 years that we've been doing the show. And so it's kind of a milestone episode for us. So thank you to Martin. Also, thank you. I think you've volunteered a few of your analysts to do the show for future episodes. I've already been in contact with John, so I don't want to advertise that yet, but I expect more KC analysts on the show in future episodes. So exciting stuff. As for me, I always make the offer, every one of our listeners, please reach out to me on LinkedIn and connect. Let's keep the conversation going.
Yeah, I think all three of us are always willing to talk identity with folks, or best German food, or if you want to see if Martin has any grandma recommendations to be able to get some of the delicacies that are coming out of that region is always helpful. So we'll have links to everyone's LinkedIn profiles in our show notes as well that people can check out. And Martin, really do appreciate your time with this. I know we run a little bit longer than we normally do, but we had to take advantage of this type of conversation, and hope people out there enjoyed it. So with that, we're going to go ahead and leave it for this week. You can visit our show on the web at identityatthecenter.com. And we're also on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. And hope everyone enjoyed the conversation. And we'll talk with everyone in the next one. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.